Good afternoon. We'll get started. First, I want to say thank you to everybody for being here. This is the first of two public meetings. The next one's going to be on February 28th. I'm going to have Pastor Johnson talk about that briefly, but I wanted to just put it right next to me. Is that better? A little bit?
Yes.
So the next meeting is on February 28th at Bright Hope. Pastor's going to talk about that briefly, but I wanted to just take a moment to say thank you to all of you. This is really about us listening to the public and starting a conversation. I wanted to talk to you about a little bit about, before we get started, the purpose of why we are here and sort of who we are and what we're doing. And then kind of talk about our approach just really briefly before we get started. And then we'll get right into listening to you, which is really the main reason that we're here. In many ways, this is a unique kind of Philadelphia conversation. The right to vote, as we all know, is so precious to us here in Philadelphia because it's where it all began. And in many ways, it's the right that guarantees all the other rights. So we take voting and enthusiasm around voting and the process around voting incredibly seriously here in Philadelphia. This effort is really an effort to guarantee that right, because we believe that a smooth process, the smoother that process is, the more that people will be encouraged to utilize that process, and the more that people will come out and vote. So we're looking at ways in which we can improve these processes so as to encourage voting in Philadelphia, not discourage voting. So when we hear complaints about challenges around the voting process, regardless of how successful the overall election was, it certainly gives us pause and gives us concerns enough to want to look at the process, hear from the public, conduct some interviews, issue a report, and try to improve that process going forward. That's what the mayor cares about. That's what the mayor has charged us with doing as a fact-finding team. It is not an investigation. It is not in any way something that is an indictment of the process or the system. And I want to say something about this team. When you look at the folks involved, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves briefly, this is about integrity in our approach as well. So my job as the managing director, those of you who don't know me, I don't think I introduced myself, but I'm Rich Negrin, the managing director of the City of Philadelphia. My job is to make sure that our process, our fact-finding process, is done with integrity. And that means that this group, from the very beginning, has started with a blank canvas, with no preconceived notions, with no agendas, other than just making improvements and guaranteeing the right to vote. That's my charge, and that's what everybody on this task force has committed to. And I'm glad to say, we're a few months into this process, and it's been clear and very evident in everything that we've done behind the scenes. So I'm grateful to this committee for that approach. I'm going to ask you to start with Nicole at the end and just kind of introduce yourself and who you're with and how long you've been with the city.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicole Harrington. I'm an investigator within the city's Office of the Inspector General. I've actually been a city employee for approximately 12 years, worked as an investigator in the Inspector General's office for about 2.5 years.
Good afternoon. I'm Hope Caldwell. I'm the Chief Deputy Integrity Officer for the City of Philadelphia. I report to Joan Markman, the Chief Integrity Officer, for the last year. Prior to that, I worked in the City Solicitor's Office for about 5 years.
Hello, my name is Kevin Johnson. I serve as the Senior Pastor of the Bright Hope Baptist Church in North Philadelphia.
Hi, I'm Terry Gillen, and I'm Director of Federal Affairs for the City of Philadelphia. And I was also the political director for Mayor Nutter's campaign when he ran for mayor.
I'm Jordan Schwartz. I'm Deputy Chief of Staff here in the Mayor's office. I've been with the city for 5 years.
Great, thank you very much, Jordan. So what I'd like to do before I turn things over to Pastor Johnson is talk about, kind of set the context for November 6th. If we can think back to that date, it was a large national election, important not just because we were electing a president, but because we had many local elections, local state reps. We had an attorney general's race, but just a very busy bout and a busy time here from an election board standpoint. In addition to that, we had some confusion around voter ID. So some machinations and widely reported around whether you needed to produce an ID at the time that you voted or not. Different court opinions changing the decision and going back and forth kind of added to some of the confusion around the context. And also, what a lot of folks don't know is that many polling places in Philadelphia changed location because of federal-related ADA, American with Disabilities Act situation. There was a lot of polling places that actually moved from their usual locations. So that's all kind of the context. And then what a lot of folks don't understand is nearly, just under 700,000 votes were cast on that day. And by and large, things went fairly well. So when you consider the scope of the election, the circumstances, brand new commissioners who were just elected and kind of going through their first major election, in that grand context, things went fairly well. But we're here because not everything went well, and because there were some challenges that we know we can improve upon. So part of our approach is to conduct interviews, which we've been doing as a group in teams of interviews, to look at documents and to talk to the stakeholders involved in this effort to kind of learn a lot of the background and a lot of the anecdotal information on what happened on Election Day. So I'm going to raise a couple of the concerns and reports that have been widely reported, and then hope to hear some detail around those reports from some of you who are here. We heard things like longtime voters being removed from poll books. We've heard about a backlog of voter registrations. We've heard about new voters that received registration cards but were not on poll sheets or in supplemental sheets. We heard about inconsistent conduct by poll workers and inconsistent processes at polling places. So the question is whether many of those things combined to lead to a higher rate of use for provisional ballots, and whether that slowed down the election, caused delays, caused disruption, and perhaps caused long lines. So those are the facts that we're looking to explore and kind of understand in more detail. We hope to take these meetings from the public, both this one and the one on February 28th, and take those anecdotes and really put some detail around those. So that's why we're here. Pastor Johnson has been gracious not only to give us time on this committee, but to chair our public outreach committee, and I want to thank you publicly for that. I know the mayor is incredibly grateful. So I want to turn things over to Pastor Johnson just to talk about what we hope to get out of the public outreach piece of this.
Good afternoon, good evening. We thank you for coming out this evening, and I want to thank Mayor Nutter for assembling this great team who works extremely hard to make sure that we are working on behalf of the citizens of this great city that we call Philadelphia. I have been privileged to serve as chair. This is our first public hearing that we will have. The next will be at Bright Hope Baptist Church on February 28th. And the reason that we are here is because the mayor has given us a specific challenge, and that is to better understand many of the challenges that the citizens of Philadelphia experienced on November 6th as they sought to cast their ballots. As you know, voting is, as Rich has already said, is a constitutional right, and we take that right very seriously. With your help today, we aim to listen and to hear your experiences on this past election day. And particularly if you experience any challenges, we want to hear those stories. We realize that there are a plethora of ways to gather information. We have conducted several interviews and we'll continue to do that. But we also want to hear from the public. So we're here today to listen to you. We're here today to hear of your stories. We're here today to hear how this process can be improved, because this is democracy. And democracies are determined by voting. And so we need your help to make sure that democracy is efficient and that it is effective for election days. So we look forward. We're here. We may ask you a few questions just for clarity, but we thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to make sure that democracy is fair and equitable for everyone.
Thank you, Pastor. So I'm now going to turn things over to my Chief of Staff, Brian Abernathy, to talk about sort of the logistics of the meeting and how you can give your input here today.
When most of you arrived, you signed in and were asked whether you would like to speak or not. Those of you who indicated that you would like to speak have been added to the speakers list, and you will be called up in the approximate order in which you signed in. If you decide that you'd like to speak, even though you didn't sign in, that way, please let me know. I'm happy to have as many folks speak as possible. Please keep your comments short and to the point and avoid commentary. We're asking everyone to keep their statement to no more than 5 minutes. We may have questions or ask for clarification on certain points, and there is a Spanish language interpreter present in case you would like to use that. Other languages, we can make alternative arrangements besides this meeting. Know that you are on Channel 64 tonight and will be replayed over the next several weeks. And finally, if you don't want to speak but still want to comment on this process, please visit the website www.phila.gov/election2012 or call 267-209-FACT, F-A-C-T. Again, that's 267-209-FACT. And thank you all.
Great. Thank you, Brian. In addition to that, we're listed for this room from 4:30 to 7 p.m. If you know anyone who is on their way here or is coming after work, we're going to stay here until 7 o'clock, and the committee will make itself available until that time. So if we finish before that, it doesn't matter. We'll still be here if folks are on their way, you know that. So with that, our first speaker, Brian.
Hi, thank you for being here today. I've been a registered voter in Philadelphia since 2006. I moved over to my new neighborhood, and with that, I knew that I would be moving, and I knew that I would be changing poll stations. So I registered myself again, changing the address 90 days before voting time, which gives enough time. When I got to my polling station, we had a bit of confusion because there were 2 separate polling stations being held in the same building, in the same room, at the exact same time. So we had people coming from 2 separate areas of the 39th Ward trying to cast their ballots. So there was a strangeness of people having to go back and forth between 2 separate books to see if they were registered, which in my neighborhood we have a lot of seniors, and this is very confusing and very upsetting for them. Myself, I was not found in the book. I was told that I was not a registered voter, in spite of the fact that I had produced my voter registration from cities that I've lived in before, my voter's registration from the Department of Justice when I lived in Germany, and my voter's registration when I lived in Paris. I brought my passport, my driver's license, backup identification, my electric bill proving that I'm living where I'm living now, anything I could to prove that I am who I am, I'm here to vote, and I did follow the rules. I also printed out a copy of my voter registration update on address, thinking, how could we run into a problem? And yet, there was a problem. When I spoke with one of the poll persons, the poll watchers, I was told I had some options. I could go down to the 52nd Street Police Department and ask a judge to give me permission to vote. Or I could call the committee of, I believe 70 they call themselves, or I could file a provisional ballot. I stated that I don't want a provisional ballot. I'd like to be in the modern world. I'd like my vote counted at the time that I vote. So I chose to go down to 56th Street, or the 52nd Street Police Department. They laughed at me because they said, you know, you're like the 14th person they've sent in here. And the guy, as he was escorting me out the door, taking his paper with the tape, putting it up on the door saying, we can't help you. So I turned around and I came to City Hall, thinking that I could speak with my council person, Janie Blackwell, as she does know me, and we have had many a conversation that there would be no reason why she wouldn't be able to say, she's who she is, this is identifiable, give her a vote. Nothing. So then I went back and I was told, in my opinion, coerced to sign a provisional ballot. When the time went on and I called in the telephone number for my provisional ballot to find out what happened with my ballot, I was told that my ballot was not counted, and then I was told that they couldn't find my provisional ballot, that perhaps it was mistakenly thrown away. So my vote was tossed in the trash. It's appalling. Now, one other thing that I want to state is that at the polling station where I was at, there were younger people there. Some of these people are part of the modern movement, the occupiers, the Philly fighters, a little bit more vocal, a little bit more determined, a little bit more steadfast, and a little bit more willing to get arrested for a cause. One of the poll workers threatened to have them arrested with trespass because they didn't want to leave unless they could cast their ballot. People were turned away. People were intimidated inside this building. And I just thought that, you know, with all that's gone on in this great city of Philadelphia, voting should not be an issue. It is the one thing that we have built a foundation on in this country, and in this city particular. And when I saw this happen, my heart broke just a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, can we ask you a question? Yeah. What's the name of your polling place? Where do you vote? Is it a school or the location?
Sansom Street between 45th and 46th in the 39th Ward. The same exact place where Janie Blackwell, councilwoman, cast her ballot.
Okay.
And she had no problem.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Okay,
what
thank
time?
you.
And what time of day was it that you voted?
I started to try to cast my vote at 7:30 in the morning. I finally casted my ballot 5 minutes before the poll closed. Exactly 3 minutes before Ms. Blackwell casted her ballot.
And did you have, when you filled out the provisional ballot, were you given like a place to fill it out, like any type of like privacy?
No, the poll worker who I filed the provisional ballot sat right directly in front of me, and when I tried to move the paper out of the way or tried to cover it, somebody else walked behind me, and it bothered me tremendously. But I wasn't going to make a huge civic issue about it. I just,
Right.
what do you do?
Ms. Monroe, it looks like you have some supporting documents.
That's my provisional
Would you
ballot.
be okay with us getting copies of
Yeah.
that before you
Do you
leave?
also want a copy of all my voters' registrations?
Whatever you want to share with us. Sure.
I'm sorry?
Copies.
I did not get my new card yet. This is my first one in Philadelphia.
Yeah. We'll get that right back
Thank
to you.
you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your testimony.
You're welcome.
Housing high. I was a poll worker at the 27th Ward, 11th Division, and the same location also had the 13th Division. 11 and 3? Sorry, she knows better than I do. I took the responsibility. There were books that had people's registered names in them, and there were supplemental books, and then there was a card file system that had been generated by a computer, and I was the person who handled the cards. So as the voting was busy the entire time. We started at 6:30 in the morning getting ready, and after the polls closed, we were still getting everything worked through at 10:30 at night. We ran out of provisional ballots. We had 90-plus provisional ballots that got filed just in the 11th Division. It was very busy the entire time. As people came up to check the these cards that were generated, I would say about 50% of them were not on that card file list, which meant they needed to be checked in the books and they needed to be checked in the supplemental books. And then if they didn't show up in either of those, they had to file provisional ballots. The woman who was in charge at that location said they had never had this many provisional ballots before. This is a polling place that is covers the area of the University of Pennsylvania students, which means that every year in that location you're going to have a lot of new voters. This is not news. This happens all the time. Whatever system is set up should be prepared for registering a lot of new voters in that particular district. That happens all the time. I also contrast what happened here in Philadelphia to my experience when I was living in the Netherlands. And in the Netherlands, you get a piece of paper through the mail that tells you that you are going to show up at a polling place at such and such a date between this time and that time. And you are required to show up at the polling place. You're not required to vote, but you are required to show up at the polling place. And if you're there already, you might as well vote. If you do not show up and hand in this piece of paper, then you have to pay a fine. Needless to say, in the Netherlands, they have 98% of the voting population that is voting. I do business through my bank, using my telephone, using my computer. When I get stopped by a policeman, he can check every driving violation I had right there from his car. We're not living in the 19th century. It is possible. It is not even remotely difficult. It is possible to have this system be well organized and well run and cover every voter in this city. There's no excuse for anything less than that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Can I ask you a quick question, ma'am? Just one question. When you ran out of provisional ballots, when was that in the day, during the day? Yeah.
I would say like about 5 or 6 o'clock at night. And at that point, the person in charge called, she had been calling already, and whatever office she called told her to write the names of people in the front of the book who had not been able to fill.
Do you recall how many voters were not able to fill out provisional ballots at that point after 5 p.m.?
No, I don't know how many were not able to fill out. But there were more than 90 who did file provisional ballots. So.
And there were some that were not able to vote provisionally? There was at least...
there were some whose names were put in the front of the book.
Great.
Any other?
Hi everyone, my name is Chisar Tran and I'm from the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, or ALDEF. I'm the voting rights organizer. First, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. For those of you who don't know ALDEF, we're a 39-year-old nonpartisan civil rights organization that protects and promotes the voting rights of Asian Americans. We've monitored elections since 1988 for incidents of anti-voter disenfranchisement and for compliance with the Voting Rights Act. On November 6th, we conducted a nonpartisan multilingual exit poll at 4 poll sites in Philadelphia with large numbers of Asian American voters. Our attorneys and volunteers observed poll workers whose behavior and performance raised issues. Issues include voters being turned away without the right to vote, a lack of Asian language interpreters, and poll workers failing to abide by proper election procedures. In addition, every time we called the Board of Elections hotline or the Philadelphia City Commissioner's numbers, we received a busy signal. Whenever we tried to help voters look up their polling location, the online poll locator wasn't working. It was down. During a settlement agreement in 2006, the City's Council made several promises to provide language assistance to Asian American voters who speak Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, and Khmer, which is a language from Cambodia. This is because the Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, and Cambodian are the 4 largest Asian ethnic groups in Philadelphia. In prior elections, we complained about similar problems, and we noticed a backsliding from these promises. On November 6th, we observed numerous Asian American voters who experienced difficulty voting because there weren't interpreters. Voter Long Thi Bui registered to vote several months before Election Day, but never received any notification in the mail. On election day, he went to at least 3 different poll sites to try to cast his vote, but was unsuccessful. He did not have a Vietnamese-speaking interpreter to help him find his correct poll site. Mr. Bui was not able to vote that day. Voter Dien Bin Chow arrived at South Philly Branch Library to vote and needed language assistance. There wasn't an interpreter there, so the poll workers went outside and asked the Vietnamese speaker to come in and interpret for the voter so that he could vote. Bringing in random, untrained volunteers from the street to serve as interpreters is not appropriate in ensuring the quality of language assistance or the integrity of elections. In addition, we observed poll workers turn away limited English proficient Asian American voters when their names were missing from the registration rolls, rather than giving them a provisional ballot. Voter Wen Lei Zhao wasn't in the poll books at Chinese Christian Church in Chinatown, where she's voted in the past. Instead of giving her a new polling location, the poll workers sent her away with a voter registration form and directed her to the back of the voting area, where there were 3 other limited English proficient Mandarin speakers who also didn't receive language assistance. Finally, with the voter ID issue, we observed generally, notwithstanding Act 18, which was partially halted, Pennsylvania law doesn't require voters to provide ID unless they're voting for the first time at a poll site. According to the results of our multilingual exit poll, 52 respondents were required to show ID when voting, and of them, 50% were not first-time voters, therefore they weren't required to do so. We're concerned that Asian American voters were required to show ID at a disproportionately higher rates when compared to other voters. Oftentimes, Asian names are inverted, so last name is listed as the first name, or there's a misspelling. So my name, Chi Sir, would be inverted into Sir Chi. Excessive requests of Asian American voters to present ID before voting has been an issue in past elections, and we've previously written to report these problems to the city, but they keep recurring. Such demands for ID may disenfranchise Asian American voters and may also violate the Voting Rights Act. Furthermore, additional Asian American voters would be unduly burdened by the Pennsylvania Voter ID Act and have their vote denied. Many of the voters that we surveyed were first-time voters, immigrants, or limited English proficient. For many immigrants, their limited English proficiency may limit them from participating effectively in our democratic process. It's imperative that we work together to ensure that these barriers don't recur. We advocate for full enforcement of the Voting Rights Act. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and thanks for your time.
Hi. Could you tell us the 4 polling sites that
Sure.
your attorneys and volunteers?
Yes. We were at South Philly Branch Library. We were at Lowell Elementary School.
Lowell?
Lowell,
Okay.
in Olney.
Okay.
We were at Jefferson Alumni Hall in, I believe it's 12th and Locust. And we were at the Chinese Christian Church in Chinatown.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is this the first time that you've done this study?
No, we've been doing this work in Philadelphia since 2004.
So just to get a comparison
Yeah.
perspective from you, how did this election compare to what you saw in some of the others?
The same problems have been occurring in past elections, but I mentioned before, we've noticed a backsliding in the promises, so each year the level of language assistance seems to get worse and worse. So in 2011, when I was monitoring the poll sites for the primaries, we had a few Asian language interpreters, but it wasn't enough.
Right.
Or there was an interpreter speaking Taishanese in an area in Chinatown where voters speak Cantonese.
Right. I noticed you have did you put the results of the study into writing? Do you have a...
We did submit a letter to the city
Great.
and the city commissioners, and I did bring copies.
Great. Can we
have a copy?
If we could
Of
have a
course.
copy of that. And any backup data that you have that you'd be willing to share with us would be great.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for your
you.
testimony.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Short person microphone. Hi. My name is Jennifer Yuen. I have been the acting judge of elections for the 8th Ward, 2nd Division. That's in Center City West. And just want to talk a little bit about our experience with the last election. We had, I believe, 22 provisional ballots cast. That's unusually high for us.
I'm sorry, ma'am. Could you repeat the number?
We had 22 provisional ballots
22?
cast,
22.
which is unusually high for us. During the day, this is just to provide you with some points of reference, we had access to Wi-Fi in our polling place. And so one of the things that was very helpful to us was for us to be able to actually access the state's voter sites, so that when people came in and we looked on the supplemental ballot, we literally had several voters coming in with their voter ID cards, so that we knew, we also are a dual polling place with 2 divisions in 1 location, and people literally had the cards right in front of us. We knew they were supposed to be on the books. They were not on the books. They were not on the supplemental ballots. We went to the state's website, which was, calling with the telephones that were provided by the city was like literally the phone was off the hook. There was nothing that could be done. So fortunately for us, we had web access, and that proved to be instrumental in us verifying that voters actually were registered with the state. We had 22, and when we could verify that people were actually registered with the state, and there seemed to be a huge discrepancy between sort of the state's, central records and what we had on our books. Then we were having folks cast provisional ballots. Now, we were trying to do things, our minority inspector is an attorney. We were trying to do things, as much to our understanding of the letter of the law as we could, or certainly the spirit. And so, for example, we asked everyone for ID because that's what we were told we were supposed to do. So basically, it went like this. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania compels me to ask you to present a photo ID. You, however, are not compelled to show it. If there was any hesitancy on the voter's part, that's basically what I said. End of issue. But everyone was asked. We asked every single voter. And they were free to decline, and usually there was a little bit of joking or smiling about that, and that was it. But it was our understanding that we were still supposed to ask, because this was a dry run, because the injunction from the state merely prevents enforcement of the law, but that the law is on the books. Second thing, if you actually look at the language that surrounds the casting of provisional ballots, as the judge of elections, I am supposed to watch every single packet for the provisional ballots being signed at the time it's signed. It's an enormous interruption in the function of the actual sort of logistics of the voting process. So over and over again, literally, our minority inspector, who again is an attorney, sitting there and over again, while we're sitting and trying to service voters, she said, "Excuse me, Madam Judge, I now must interrupt you. You must stand here and look at this ballot being signed." Not that it serves any actual useful purpose, but if you do it to the letter of the law, it's a huge interruption in the day. Also a problem, as mentioned before, a voter doesn't really feel like they're casting a vote when they're shoved off to a chair or a sofa in the corner. They don't have any privacy. Literally, if there were some way or some provision that we could give them, even if it's a clipboard or something, and they could get in, there's something magic about the curtain. If they could get inside the curtain, we don't have to turn the polling machine on, but if they can get in the curtain and have the privacy to cast their ballot, it feels more real to people, and it feels like we are respecting their rights as voters. And if there were some way we could formalize that, because the machines are electronic, if we don't push the button on the back, no vote can be cast. So that would be enormously helpful. A couple of other notes. As just an individual voter in no capacity at all as an election official, I received a really nice large flyer the week of the election saying, with a Pennsylvania driver's license, saying, "Be prepared to show it." What kind of mixed message are we sending to voters? It was a week before the election. This was long after the injunction was passed. I have no idea who mailed it or how it got mailed. It was completely inappropriate. But not only that, I was riding the SEPTA bus, going to work. There's the same ad in January on the SEPTA bus. Why do you think people are confused? Right. They're confused because we still have essentially propaganda everywhere for voter ID. Of course people are confused. Right. And if you are not a native speaker of English, and you're seeing these signs everywhere with the driver's license, it's tremendously, horribly confusing. Right. So it ran fairly smoothly for us, but it was, overall, there was a lot of confusion. What we heard during the day, literally what trickled down, sort of word from folks with cell phones, and what we were finding with voters was that there were particular locations where voters were being registered in sort of mass outdoor registration. It literally reached the point where folks said, ask them if they were registered kind of at this spot on the street. Because we are hearing that a whole mass of voters who are registered, again, outdoors with mass signups from that location are not in the books. And so there's some sort of batching process where we're having a problem. And while we're at it and while I'm here, I had to leave work early to get here. It's a job where, you know, to be an election official, to have a fully staffed, it's not, we're getting a lot of folks who, it's just, you can't get people to sort of come away, and the more complicated it is, the more problems we're going to have with having any sort of uniform interpretation. It doesn't help they keep moving the target sort of every several days before this election, but, you know. And again, we were fortunate, we had a tremendous amount of resources at our disposal, and even then it was, you know, not the easiest thing. So, any questions?
I have a quick question. Did you have to turn anyone, or when you told voters that they had to fill out a provisional ballot, did anyone walk away because they did not want to fill out a provisional, or was anyone not allowed, or, you know, not able to vote at all?
No, even if we could not find them in the state's voter, you know, we were not going to turn anyone away. But we went through everything. We were, you know, looking for their names. We asked, have you voted in Philadelphia before? Have you voted in Pennsylvania before? Have you checked with your old polling place? But, you know, quite in some cases what we found is that people were on the books in their previous polling places.
Right.
And we would ask them, we said, you know, the best way to ensure that your vote gets counted, we know it's a hassle, but please go to your old polling place, get in the booth and vote. If it's really too much trouble, we will give you a provisional ballot here, but we want to see your vote counted, and the best way you can do that is to go to your old polling place.
And did you have a handful of voters that were in the SURE system, the state system,
Right.
that weren't in the system?
We had a number of voters who were in the state system that weren't on our books.
Right, but vice versa. Was there anyone that came to vote that was not in the state
There
system?
were, and we still gave them provisional ballots
them
anyway, because that's what the provisional ballots are for.
Right.
But a number of people who were given the provisional ballots were unhappy, and understandably, and we're pretty vocal about it. And it was just sort of like, you know, what kind of operation are you running here?
Right.
And we didn't have a really good answer for that.
Let me ask you this question, Jennifer. Did you all receive any training for how to administer the provisional ballots?
It's gone through every single time in voter training, but I don't know if any of you have ever been to the election official training. That election official training flies faster than, you know, an express vehicle. And it's not the fault at all, in any way, of the people that run the training. There's a lot of material to cover. What would be helpful would be to, again, have information that could be accessed by election officials at the time we need it on Election Day. So that if we don't know, or if we need a refresher, or we need some pointers, and it's also all inside the huge sort of newsprint guide that is given to all of us at training, put in the boxes of all the paper materials. It's there, but it's in a format that at the time is a little bit difficult to wade through when sort of you've got a really angry voter standing there and trying to figure out, and the steps for the provisional ballots are really complex, with sort of the ballot, the signing of the enclosing envelope, the other envelope that goes around. It's so many layers. It's like making baked Alaska. It's crazy.
Are you aware at all of the state of Pennsylvania's website that has different training videos on it? I just happened to find it just because I was searching on it. I was surprised to learn about it, but...
Well, we weren't using it on that day, let's put it
Right,
that way.
that's
In your own language, you were surprised to find it, you know, and that's part of the issue here. And again,
Right.
we had access to Wi-Fi and the internet to be able to go do that because the phone lines failed. The phone lines that were set up and the tools that we were given, and what the city tries to provide, which is putting actual phones in boxes and bringing them to polling places. In the event of a situation like what we had last November, it's not enough.
Can I ask you about the phone piece?
Yeah, absolutely.
Did they ever work throughout the day?
The
Or
phones,
was-
no, the phones physically
No, I understand
worked.
that the phones were mechanically working.
Right.
But you weren't able to get through to the other side.
It was really, really difficult at sort of peak voting hours.
That's what I'm asking.
So
was there a given moment where, during the day, where you had to use the phone, where you were able to utilize them and get somewhere?
I think at a certain point, like basically once we got through the morning rush, we stopped using the phone because first we couldn't get through, and we also found essentially this other method that was quicker and more accurate, and again, partly because it was taking up so many resources to process the provisional ballots. We didn't have time to literally have somebody standing there on the phone waiting to like get through a phone tree, so we just went off to the internet.
Yeah, thanks for your testimony, and thanks for being a judge of elections. I've been a judge, so I know what a tough job it is, so thank you. So I want to make sure I'm clear. So if you went to the state system and you found somebody in there, you let them vote provisionally but not on the machine, is that correct? Or did you let them vote on the machine?
We would let people vote regardless of whether they were in the state system or not. But the state system,
by provisional ballot?
By provisional ballot.
But not on the machine?
But we would not let anyone vote on the machine that was not in the books.
Okay.
But
different judges did different things on Election Day. That's why I'm asking you that question.
No, we would not let anyone vote on our machines who was not in the books.
Okay, thanks.
But we were using the state website to try to help locate if people happen to be registered somewhere else. That was the main thing that we were looking for.
Which is a really smart and helpful thing to do, so it's good that you did that.
But again, you know, we were lucky that we had that access. You can't ensure that at every polling place. You can't ensure that people have devices, but there needs to be some other way to take off the traffic from the phone line because the phone line's inadequate.
Right. Agree.
Can I ask a follow-up question on the provisional ballot itself? You said there was 22?
I believe it was 22.
Have you served as a Board of Elections during a prior presidential election?
I have not.
But
I understand that the 22 is significantly higher than the 2008 presidential election.
Great. That's what I want to make sure I understood.
Okay.
Thank you.
And just one follow-up on the verifying with the state system. Either in the, do you feel like there was, what kind of guidance did you get about how to deal with either even checking that system or using what you learned in that system as you dealt with voters? What kind of guidance did you get either in the newsprint or in training about how to deal with that scenario?
Could you detail that a little more?
So you made a decision to ask voters who are not in the poll book to look at the state system.
We looked at the state system. We took their information and looked them up.
Right. And if they were in the state system,
and they were registered elsewhere, we would say, you are registered at this other place, or this is the mix-up. You know, you're registered, or you are registered here, but you're not on our books.
So I think the question Jordan's asking is, did you do that on your own volition based on, or were you directed to do that through your training, do you recall?
Were you given any guidance on how to deal with that scenario?
Yeah.
Don't quote me on that. I don't. How about if I simply say I don't recall being told one way or the other?
That's a fair answer.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Scarlett McCahill. I'm here representing the Vote for Homes Coalition, which is a coalition of 50 social service providers in Philadelphia who work with homeless and low-income voters. We've been around since 1999, and I am staff at Project Home, and my position is in the Public Policy Office. I do community education and engagement. So you can imagine that with our folks, we were really busy over the summer preparing them with proper ID, which is a barrier certainly for voters who are homeless, and then also simultaneously registering them. So since 1999, we've registered 15,000 homeless and low-income voters in the Philadelphia area. This year, we registered 1,600 and change. So we did pretty well. But on Election Day, we operate a logistics center, and we go with our voters so that they can vote, knowing that they're a highly transient population, knowing that they oftentimes are inexperienced in voting. What we do is we worked with a cadre of 150 volunteers. They were required to sit through and participate in a 3-hour training with us, similar to what poll workers go through. We use that big newspaper, and we try and have our volunteers and our voters be as aware of their responsibilities and their rights as possible before Election Day comes up. So on Election Day, we had 136 voters that we took to the polls. We provided transportation, and we provided also an escort that went with them. And prior to doing that, we really wanted to make sure that we were setting our voters up for success. So starting on November 2nd, we verified each of our voters' polling place using the Shore Portal system. And so we got our folks on the phone, and we talked with case managers and homeless shelters. We talked with voters in person or by phone, and we did our very best to make sure we were going to the right place and save a whole lot of headache and kind of fear and frustration on the part of our voters. So on Election Day, we had the capacity to document everybody who was riding with us, where we were sending them, and also we kept kind of in real time, we kept our own field complaints. So 18 of those 136 voters that we escorted had barriers at their polling place. And you have to understand that I've done my very best to cull data for you, but we do have a highly transient group of people that we're supporting. So of those 18 folks who we documented their concerns during Election Day, 14 of them we were able to really get the full picture of what happened. And so 8 of them voted provisionally. I have the receipt number or the physical receipt itself for 5 of them, and I began calling on their behalf really the next day. Okay, let's see. No, I'm sorry. And then I read the fine print, and it said, give us 7 days. So I said, I'd kind of back off a little bit, and starting on that 7th and 8th day, then I started calling the number that was listed on the provisional ballot receipt, and I got consistently the same message for each of those voters, which is that their provisional ballot was not cast. So, moving forward,
What did that mean to you?
Well, that was unclear. I really didn't want to, and I have folks who are coming to me and saying, Scarlett, my vote come in yet? Scarlett, my vote come in yet? I'm saying, well, I'm not sure. That felt to me deeply dissatisfying, and that certainly felt dissatisfying to the voters that I worked with as well. So on the 17th of December, I was able to speak in the commissioner's office, in Commissioner Schmidt's office, with one of his staffers who was very helpful, very accommodating, and she herself looked into the situation for each of those voters as well, and she found the same result. So by December 17th.
And I'm sorry, just to clarify, the provisional ballots weren't cast, or the provisional ballots weren't counted?
When I called the automated system, the message was, this provisional ballot does not exist. And so when Linda in Commissioner Schmidt's office was looking on my behalf, she said, it's not done yet. She said, so that message in the automated system that says this provisional ballot does not exist is the placeholder demarcation, which can be interpreted as we're not there yet. So I think that's maybe an area for a quick fix. That message is not the message I imagine the city is intending to convey to voters who are using that system.
And is that a city phone number though, or is it the state number?
I don't know.
Okay.
It's whatever
The city?
number is on the...
We can look at one.
Yeah, we can check.
Because I know
Sure.
you can look up to the provisional ballot, like receipt number
Mm-hmm.
and or the person's name and birth date to confirm whether online on the state's website.
Right. And so anytime...
Is that the same system
It's the
is what
same.
I'm wondering, I think.
I imagine. I was doing both, and I've documented the dates that I looked for each of my people kind of along the way, and I'm very happy to share that narrative with you all because ultimately the takeaway that I would like you all to hear from my experience and my voters' experience is that as a particularly marginalized group socially, people who don't have access to even shelter, people who spend the summer living on the parkway, those people have just as much capacity, wherewithal, and right to be able to vote like any of us who are more well-to-do.
And I do have I applaud what your organization has done because everybody does have a right to vote. What did you all use for an address?
If somebody was, so in keeping with what we were able to learn and educate our voters, if somebody was at a shelter, we used their shelter address, their mailing address. Many folks who had been registered at 802 North Broad when that was with PCH now have moved their registrations. If it's someone who is street homeless, they're registered, many people, 287 on Election Day, were registered voters at 315 South Broad Street, which is Broad Street Ministries. So we had one of our volunteers who was very experienced at the polling place that services that address, knowing full well that that influx, especially for that polling place, would seem very confusing to poll workers, and that polling place was quite accommodating for our folks. Yeah.
So just to close the loop on the 8 folks, was there ever a time when you went back and looked at whether any of those 8 provisional ballots were actually counted and found that any of them were counted?
I've been able to confirm so far that 1 has been counted.
1 out of the 8.
Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you so much for your time.
Can we get a summary of your data?
Sure.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Where should I send it? Maybe I should coordinate here?
Right here.
Wonderful.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Carol Jenkins. I am the ward leader in the 27th. I'm the one that kind of tried to remedy some of the problems that took place that Nina had referenced earlier. Because the 27th, as Nina mentioned, encompasses the University of Pennsylvania, we have a high late registration every single presidential election. So I kind of looked at, the anecdotal evidence that has come in. I don't want to go over again, but I would like to look at some of the problems that developed for this election that did not take place in prior elections. So what was the same? We have a high registration volume every presidential election. 4 years prior to that, we had a higher registration influx because of the popularity of Barack Obama. So this was standard. Nothing differed there. ADA, polling places, this has been in the process for a long time. So we had a couple of changes this time. We had a couple of changes along the line over the last few years. The city has tried to put these in place, instead of the whole ward changing a few at a time. So this was not any different than prior elections. So that's not a problem either. What is different? The voter ID bill certainly was different. But because we have such a high volume of new registrations, this wasn't totally different in our ward either, because if you're a new registration, you have to present an ID anyway. So this was not different. So this is kind of the context of what went on in my ward, and I will acknowledge that the 27th ward is an anomaly in the city. We have Penn. We also have divisions in Southwest Philly where we had very different problems, and some of them have already been referred to. We had missing people on the poll books, but less of a problem that we had in some of the other divisions. The 3rd and the 11th polling place was probably the worst one we had that day. This leads us to what changes can be made, which is, I think, maybe what you want to look at closer to anything. What changes can the city do? What can they not do? Can they do anything about the voter ID bill? Obviously not. The state is going to dictate what happens to that, and we can't do anything about it other than try to work with whatever change they make on that particular day. So we can't do anything about that. The process that broke down that I think that should have to be remedied from this city is provisional ballots should not be the way to go. There is no reason, if you've got access to the share system on your computer, that you cannot access an electronic voting machine. Whatever change that has to take, whether it has to take place at some level, even if it has to go to the state, there is absolutely no reason that we can't get into the 21st century here. Even if we're not completely into the 21st century, maybe we can go to the first few years of the 21st century, okay? So, because we have an educated population at the University of Pennsylvania, my day was a nightmare, just like Nina's was, trying to tell people that can show me on their smartphone that they are in the share system, but they cannot use the electronic voting machine, and they have to use a provisional ballot. The other thing is mixed messages. You know, I went around to each of my divisions and told them, because a prior practice was, if you could not find them on the poll books or the supplemental lists, if you called the city, they would tell you whether their name. Now, this is my experience, and it differs from ward to ward. If you could verify, if the city could verify that that name appeared, you could let them vote.
On the machine.
On the machine. On the machine. Now, this has been referred to time and time by some of the speakers. The phones were busy all day long. You could not get through. Then I said, okay, if you can show me on your smartphone the same information that I can get from this city, what's the difference? So I said, let them vote. I got a call from the commissioner's office about 2 o'clock in the afternoon because the news had gotten back to them, and they said that is not the law. I cannot let them do that. Part of the reason is that they changed the system, so the backup that had been put in place that you could use to list who voted and who not was no longer applicable. So I had told them to put it in the back of the book. So, okay, was that a good system? No, probably not. But at the same time, their vote counted on the machine. So it did cause a little bit of confusion about how many voters you have on the machine and how many people are on the books. But their vote counted. Okay, so that has to be clarified. You can't send mixed messages. You have to have a commissioner who's making a decision that has actually worked a darn election. I get worked up about this. This was not the best day of my life, I've got to tell you. So, know what you're doing. And, say this could happen, that can happen. We've already heard the training process is a joke. I've tried to supplement a few times to have my judges come in and train new judges so they have some kind of a clue how to figure out what they're actually doing on election day. And whether that happens in every ward, whether it's a possibility in every ward, maybe not. But, I would throw that out there maybe as a suggestion. The difference, what differences did we see in this election from last? So what happened? The voter ID, obviously something that was different. And of course, the biggest difference was this was a new regime in the commissioner's office. So do we want to look at what broke down in the system? The supplemental lists come out from Delaware Avenue. State has nothing to do with it. It comes out from their database, it's printed out at Delaware Avenue. There were lots of names missing from those supplemental polling books names. So, what's going on there? How come those names weren't on there? Okay, so that's about all my complaints. Anybody want to add anything? Mary,
excuse me,
committee person, has been a committee person.
I have a question. Carol, do you have a sense of how many, how you think, you're saying the supplemental book was deficient. How did that compare to 4 years ago?
Oh, not even close. Not even close. I mean, we had, how many did you have in yours? I would have maybe 2 or 3. I mean, it varied from
give us a sense
division to division.
Give us a sense of the scale.
Well, on the 3rd and the 11th,
right, we heard
probably,
that.
Yeah, I mean, probably.
The 9th, usually we have 700 voters. We had 95, 97 new voters on the street list. voters 4 years ago. Now, there's a lot of people missing.
Well, how many provisional ballots did you have 4 years ago as opposed to?
Yeah,
Yeah, so I mean,
right?
I would go from zero. In some division, I would go from 0 provisional ballots to 15.
Okay.
Some of them would go, as Nina mentioned, the 2 divisions there, I don't think that they broke into double digits, either one of them.
Right.
And we ran out of provisional ballots in those, which is another thing that could be clarified. They're trying to say how we get these provisional ballots. It's like, that's not the issue, folks. We don't want provisional ballots. You want to eliminate all provisional ballots. So,
Okay.
okay.
Students come in and have other students take their picture as they come out of the voting
Yeah.
booth. They are so excited.
They're voting for the first time. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Any other questions?
Ms. Jenkins, that 2 p.m. telephone call that you received from the commissioner's office, did you speak directly with the commissioner or a staff
Yes,
person?
I spoke directly to Commissioner Singer.
To Commissioner Singer.
And she told me to stop it. And so I gave that, I followed directions, but I might have put a little bit disclaimer in there to all my judges because it had broken down. The system had broken down so badly at that point. It just was a nightmare.
Okay. Thank you.
Same question I asked earlier. Do you recall, I know it was a busy day, around what time you ran out of provisional ballots?
Well, Nina said, these are the only divisions I ran out of. And that was another, there was all kinds of confusion of how those divisions, I was called and said I should find out which of my divisions I needed provisional ballots if I was close. So I did that. I started to go around to ask how many they had left. And then midway through that procedure, I was called and said I had to have the judges call if they ran low. So then I had to do the whole route all over again to tell them I couldn't get them there. I not only could not deliver the provisional ballots, which was the original plan, I could not even call to get the provisional ballots and have them delivered. The judge had to do it, and then they would deliver the provisional ballots. So it was a mess. It was an absolute mess.
So do you have a sense of how many actually ran low or ran out? It sounds like 1 ran out. How many of them ran low?
I think there were 3 others that ran low, but I don't know what that has to do with anything.
Okay.
As I said, that's not the problem. The problem is that we had provisional ballots as a problem. We shouldn't have had it. We shouldn't have had people going voting
on election day, you were going around to all the different divisions within.
Yeah, that's the
the
procedure
27th
usually for ward leaders on election day.
There's another problem with the provisional ballots, which is they take time and the line.
Yeah, excellent point. Another reason that we should not have provisional ballots. That was a nightmare, Nina. Thank you again so much, because we had a line out the door all day long, and we also have cramped spaces. One of the problems with the ADA law is we have to put polling places in. The 3rd and the 11th vote in a room that's probably from that window over to the wall and maybe that first chair. It's ridiculous. And that it's not the only polling places that have those cramped space. So we have people out in the hallway trying to do the provisional ballots. They need assistance. We have limited poll workers. It was a mess. Eliminate provisional ballots. That's got to be a focus of this panel.
Okay. Carol, are you aware of any instance where, because of those long lines you were talking about, anybody gave up and decided not to vote?
Yes, absolutely. And, I spent a fair amount of time out in the hallway trying to encourage these people. They were students, so, okay, if you couldn't come back after this class, this is a low time to come in. If you could come back then, and all of that. So did we get all these people to come back after their last class? I didn't follow them around Penn's campus to find out whether they came back, but, I can certainly let you know that there were a lot of lost votes in there. Yeah.
Did you also see any patterns in terms of those who either were or were not in the poll book where they had tried to register? Did they tell you stories about how recently they had tried to register, where they registered, any of that?
Most of the ones on Penn's campus, usually there were the organizations on Penn gets out the vote. Most of them were organizations that were valid, that are very cognizant of their putting the voter ID. And again, you know, these people could find them. They were on the list. Had registered, and their names were on the poll books, or it should have been on the poll books. So there was no confusion there. I had a couple of people show up at Houston Hall because that's where he registered to vote, even though he lived in South Philly. So you had some of that, you know, confusion about early people that registered for the first time, but not a tremendous problem. That wasn't the breakdown. The breakdown was because there's such a short time period. Penn students come in September, it closes out in October, so we have a huge volume coming in to the city registration in that month period. So, but that, again, it happens every presidential election.
And in every presidential election, are there oftentimes a lot of people on those supplemental lists because they're the late registry?
Yeah.
Now, you had talked about it for a second there, and I got confused, but you were talking about the supplementals or the provisionals. Were there more people listed on the supplementals this year?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, than before?
Yeah, there were a higher number on the supplement, much higher. I would say, you know, probably 100 times higher in some divisions. So there was a breakdown on the entry of new registered voters that should have been on the regular poll books. Mm-hmm. And additionally, there was a breakdown in the supplemental list where people were completely excluded from the supplemental list that they should have been on. Any other?
Thank you. Brian, how many names do we have? Okay.
Good evening. My name is Emma Tramble, and starting in August of 2012, I actually volunteered to work with the League of Women Voters to help them set up a telephone program to contact senior citizens who were identified as possibly not having voter ID. So the reason why I took such a interest is because I actually have extensive experience with voter identification and database work. I've worked on partisan and nonpartisan political initiatives, and so throughout the entire process of the voter ID project, I got to know pretty much the Philadelphia demographics. On election night, the League of Women Voters runs a hotline through 6ABC, and we noticed a lot of calls were coming in from people who had said they had either voted in the 2008 general or after, who said they weren't in the poll books. So since I was manning the lines, I said I'll look them up in the database that we use. It's called the Voter Activation Network Database, and it's used by political campaigns, including major presidential campaigns, so it's a pretty valid voter database. And the information is obtained from the state, so it's pure information from the state. It's not enhanced. So everyone that's in the database is someone who's registered. And what we started to notice were a lot of the people who said that they weren't in the poll books were identified in the database as being dropped. So what the database does is to help people who are doing demographic work, it shows who was an active registrant and then for some reason they were dropped from the system. So we took down the names of those voters, and I actually called the Board of Elections here in Philadelphia. They did say that some of those voters, actually all of the voters, have been dropped for various reasons. Some of the voters had said that they had changed their registration at PennDOT and did not understand why they had been dropped. So I went ahead and did more research and found that 45,432 Philadelphians who had voted in the 2008 election or after it had been dropped. The database does not say why, because it is raw data from the state, so it just has that they were dropped. I went on to do more research and dropped anyone who had registered from January 2008 to 2012. The reason I did that was because I know there was a lot of excitement about the Obama candidacy, and so I know the Philadelphia population is not really transient. We have a lot of older voters, and I wanted to see what the numbers look like if I just removed people who had maybe registered because they were enthusiastic. The number only dropped by 8%, and so there were 41,655 Philadelphians who had voted from 2008 or later who were dropped from the system. I also have, I did the information across the board throughout the entire state, but Philadelphia was the county with the highest number of dropped voters. And I even boiled it down to people who had voted in the 2012 primary, and 150 of them have been dropped. So I do have an extensive report. I can submit it if you're interested.
Oh, yes, we are. You have a card attached to it?
Yes, I do.
That'd be great. Yeah, we'll get a copy of that if you don't mind.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How you doing? My name is Louis Harris. I was a ward leader, advocate, and a whole lot of other things. But my biggest concern of showing up here today is not to put the blame on anybody, but there's a lot more, I think, to this whole process that need to be brought up to attention. And that is also the fact that the polling places and the electoral board that's in the polling places need to have a mechanism that mandates them to be trained. Because as it stands now, they train if they want to, they show up if they want to. A lot of them are very elderly, have been there for years, and think that the same process and the same thing that they've been doing is what's right. A lot of the polling places, I've been to about 2,000, because I have a group called the Election Learning Center, and I teach kids to ride around to the different polling places and to view anything that's out of compliance. For example, any literature out on the front, you know, those kinds of things. Also, I help to put in minority inspectors and clerks as well to try and balance the polling places so that it would be an even and fair election. And even in that process, as well as the process that everybody's presented about the provisional ballot, no matter what you tell people in the polling places, no matter how much information you give them, how many decrees, how many documentation, if they don't read it and they're not mandated to come to a training, they don't know. So of course, when they hear that there's a such thing as a minority inspector and they had the right to appoint a clerk, they don't believe it. Again, that falls back on who is the one who's going to mandate these people to be trained. And then how do they get the information in time and train about these changes that occur inside the electoral board? You know, how do you go about it? And I think one of the problems also, and I just want to address this, is that there should be, like we have kids running around the polling places to inspect and to see what's going on. I think on election day, especially something like a presidential election, the what they call the voter registration commissioners should have an outreach team out there. They should be visible, traveling like as if they were some of these ward leaders, going from polling places to polling places to help offset some of the confusion. Because right now there's a big problem with the voters registration commissioner versus committee of 70. If you ask anybody on the grassroots level, who would you listen to? Would it be the commissioner of voter registration who has authority, or committee of 70, which is another nonprofit organization that's just a watchdog? They would believe committee of 70. So there has to be a bigger change in the strength and the impact of the commissioner office and how they can mandate and get people to comply to training so that they know what's right and what's wrong. And right now, from the conversation I've had with many of the commissioners, specifically one for a long period, they said that by law, they don't have the authority to make anybody from the electoral board go to training. So with the ladies and the people that were talking about how people don't know how to do the provisional and how to do this and how to do that, it's because they're not trained. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Is there any question? Oh, no, and by the way, all of the complaints, all of the documentation I've handed over to the commissioners, all 3 commissioners. But there's at least 40, 50 improprieties that went on in the polling place because of a lack of education and training. So I documented that and I passed them on. So if you're interested to see any of this, you can.
Get a copy of that.
I'm sorry, Mr. Harris?
Yeah,
You
Louis
said
Harris.
you were a former ward leader, sir?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
I resigned.
Okay.
I was involved with the Republican Party as a ward leader.
Okay.
I was working with Democrats. I mean, I've been doing this for years.
Okay.
One of the biggest things I was concerned about is a fair election. And,
Yes.
and what I talk about, and that's why I say this is important, because everybody keeps thinking that it's an issue of a Republican being inside of a polling place and all that. It's not. What's not being taught is what is a polling place. It's supposed to be a sanctuary of impartiality. Everybody in there. But what I see is ward leaders, on both sides, giving food to the electoral board, which to me is unethical. They should leave them alone because you are influencing the board. That should be almost like a judge. You see, and then the other part of it is that they allow, if you were a young person who wants to run for office and going against an incumbent, you are in the same situation as a Republican because the incumbent know the electoral board. They have some kind of oversight over them through their ward leaders. So we have to neutralize them and get them to understand that their job is to be impartial, whether they represent the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. Because we got good independent candidates coming up, and we got good young people that's running under those parties. And if it's not done right, and the people aren't trained to know that you don't represent a party inside the polling place. You don't represent them. You represent the voting public. And you're supposed to make sure that there's a fair election. That's your job. And it's not getting through in none of the training. What I see now is people training people to be this and be that in the electoral board, but they never teach them what their job is and what the polling place represent. So that's my suggestion, is to get that involved. So if
Mr.
it's
Harris,
any...
may we have your complaints? Copies of your complaints, sir?
Do I, who?
May we have copies of your complaints,
Yes.
there, sir?
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Reverend Chester H. Williams. I'm tearing up your microphone because I'm not used to one not connected. But I thank God for being here, and I want to say again, a picture's worth 1,000 words. I'm the president and founder of the Chew and Belfield Neighborhood Organization since 1981, and also I was acting judge of elections for the last 4 elections for the 59th Ward, 10th Division. Prior to that, I was the committee person for the 59th Ward, 10th Division. And with all that combined, my job is to teach the people. And not only did I got the education to teach them, but I went door to door, giving people donations out my personal pocket. Because me being handicapped, I can't keep getting out of that car so many times. And put flyers in their doors so they can make a choice. But at least they would know where to vote and what a right you have to vote. And the problem was that this word went out about, I think someone said earlier, the communication of letting people know that they have the right to vote was horrible. And to show you that people really wanted to vote so bad, we have these people specifically came in, a lot of these are my poll workers, but you'll see a lady in a wheelchair, you'll see a lady that was brought there in a stretcher because she wanted to vote. And I say that strongly because we should not ever put any hindrance before the people to do something which is their God-given right in America, to vote, come just as you are. And when we take that from the people, regardless of what their age, disability may be, regardless of what color their skin may be, you cut us to the core, not saying you, but whoever created that. It cut us to such a core of our heart that I couldn't sleep. I kept calling people, going to every meeting that I could get to. The right word can get out to the people to let them know, if you need a ride, call Reb. We'll get somebody to get you there. Because it's so important of what they throw these loopholes in. And I'm telling you, the forms that you had to fill out if a person wasn't in the poll, thank God that I went to the training. Because the way they pack it should not be packed like that. All that material should have been put together in one package. Not the judge of election had to put it together to give it to the person, make sure they signed this and filled it out right. My people perish because of lack of knowledge and vision. And they're perishing over this election issue because more people just wanted to vote. Some say because President Obama, yes, that helped a lot. But they wanted to vote. So why try to stop them when this is something, they ain't asking you to pay for nothing. They ain't asking you to give no money. They ain't asking you to give no food. They said, just let me come out there and pull that button. Yeah. Last but not least, I pray everyone hear my voice that got any connection. Bring Philadelphia, Pennsylvania up to date of how to vote. These old machines we got, it need to be set on fire, throw it in the river, and whatever you want to do, bury them. Why can't we have these modern machines like these other states have that you can vote all year long? Go shopping, I know we all like to shop, and go in the supermarket and cast your vote. Nobody knows but you cast that vote. All I'm asking all of you to do, pass the good news. Yes. We can make a change for the better. Let's not go back. Let's go forward. And as I said before, I will leave this picture. I'll give it to you and my cards if anyone will call me. Come up and see us at the 59th Ward, 10th Division. Come see the Chew in Belleville. You're all welcome because we love to have you be with us. God bless everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's it.
Great. Anybody who did not sign up? Great. So I want to say on behalf of the entire committee, thank you so much. I think we've learned a lot tonight. We appreciate all of you coming here. Most of you stayed the entire time. If you have anything else that you want to, we're going to be here for a while until 7 o'clock. If you want to share anecdotes or conversations with us after the public meeting, feel free to do so. Please keep in mind, February 28th, if you know folks, if you go back and there are people who had a similar experience, but they're not here tonight, February 28th at Bright Hope Baptist Church, you can be there, and they can share their experience with us. Anything you want to add on that, Pastor?
No, just again, thank you for your patience and thank you for coming out this evening. And if you know of other people who were not able to come tonight, please come. There is parking available. We know how difficult that is in an urban environment, but there's parking available at Bright Hope Baptist Church on the 28th.
Brian said this earlier. I want to read the website again in case you want to share that with anyone. That's www.phila.gov/election2012. Again, www.phila.gov/election2012, or call 267-209-FACT, F-A-C-T. Thank you very much. Have a great night.